out to Socrates. Socrates still trying to get the opening. Oh, Socrates! Whoa!
And there it is. The crazy gang have beaten the Culture Club.
Maggie Thatcher, can you hear me? Maggie Thatcher, your boys took a hell of a beating. Your boys took a hell of a beating.
Welcome to another podcast from Your Boys Took a Hell of a Beating. My name's Gary Thacker and we're back in Book Corner to chat to a very special guest about his latest book. But before that, I want to introduce my co-host for this evening's podcast. First, Mr. Dave Bowler. How you doing, Dave?
Good evening, Gary. Looking forward to this.
Okay, and my second co-host is Mr. Paul McParlan. Paul, how are you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. I mean, I read Norman's articles all the time, back past magazines, so just having a chance to chat to him live is absolutely superb.
Just to give you some idea of the CV of today's guest, as well as being an author, he's also a sports historian and television scriptwriter who, in 2015, had his 100th book published. He was chief football reporter with the Daily Express in Fleet Street from 1966 to 1974 and has been a freelance writer since. A quick bit of maths would reveal that with his new book coming out being his 123rd, that equates to releasing a book every 6 months or so. A total that reveals just how amateur us authors in the Your Boys team really are. And suffice to say that each of his books has been a bestseller.
Lies.
His latest book focused on the England 1966 World Cup triumph. He was the only reporter to get into the England dressing room at the end of the World Cup final. And in the introduction to his book, he states that, "I promise this book is as intimate and informative as you can get. I've read it, and trust me, that promise certainly holds true." Today's guest on Book Corner is none other than the legendary Norman Giller. Norman, welcome to Your Boys Took a Hell of a Beating, buddy.
Thank you, Gary, and it's a pleasure and a privilege to be speaking to you.
Oh, bless you. Right, let's, as I said, let's open the book and get inside. So, firstly, Norman, tell us briefly introduce the book to us and tell us why you wrote a book about this particular subject.
Well, as you gentlemen are all journalists, you will appreciate what I'm saying when I point out that my assignment was the quotes man for the Daily Express. And the quotes man meant I wasn't there to report the match, but to report what people were saying and their reactions. And it's only now, 60 years later, that I realise what a privilege that was, because most people were watching it on television or were actually at the ground, but they weren't having the access that I had, not only to the players, but also the manager and the coaches, and it was fascinating to be part of that and also be sitting there as an eyewitness of it all.
It must have been an amazing experience, and I want to get into the book and talk about. There's so many topics we can talk about. I was just talking to Paul and Dave briefly before you came on the podcast, and we all really enjoyed the book, and it gave us an insight that's it's a famous occasion in football, of course. We found so much more different insights in it from getting to the book. So I want to talk about a few topics. So firstly, this sounds a bit strange. I'm going to start almost at the end. So firstly, team selection for the final. Jimmy Greaves.
Jimmy and I, name dropping here, we were buddies from the age of 17, and so we're very close friends. And as you know, Jimmy picked up a gash on the shin in the third match against France. And the controversy was whether Alf Ramsey should select Jimmy for the final. And on the day of the final, we still didn't know what the team was, because Alf was keeping it from the Germans. And I had the lead article on the back page of the Daily Express where I had to commit myself to saying that Alf should pick an unchanged team, which was a bit like stabbing my dear buddy Jimmy Greaves in the back. But England had been so exceptional against Portugal in the semi-final that we were old-fashioned in those days, and we used to say you can't change a winning team. And so we did. I in the Daily Express said Alf should leave Jimmy Greaves out, and Jimmy never ever let me forget it. Always with a twinkle in his eye, but deep down he really did mean it, because I had stabbed an old friend in the back. But Alf was proved right by the result, 4-2, with Jeff Hurst scoring 3 goals.
Indeed. Paul, coming to you first, matey. It must have been such a difficult decision. Jimmy Greaves, obviously, the the out and out best striker England had at that time. And to not play him in a World Cup final, despite Hurst playing so well as Norman put there, it must be a difficult decision.
Well, I mean, in terms of being the manager in a World Cup, it's a big decision you can make, isn't it? I mean, Norman, I'm really interested just to ask you about. You mentioned in the book about Jimmy having had hepatitis the year before. Do you think he'd fully recover from that by the time the World Cup had come around?
Well, Gary Lineker famously said that he also suffered from hepatitis, and it took him 3 years to shake it off. So Jimmy had managed to get himself fit for the World Cup in 6 months, and he later admitted to me many years later that he had lost half a yard, but he was that still meant he was the best goal striker England had ever had. Even with that, that lack of bite that he had over 20 yards. I mean, at his absolute peak, which was back in the 65 era, he could outlast anybody over 60 yards. But he was probably a yard short when the 66 World Cup was staged.
Oh, that's a real pity. And just one more thing on Jimmy Greaves there, Norm. I mean, obviously,
this is a Scouser talking to me, isn't it?
Yeah, but yeah.
Well, Sir Roger was a good pal of mine.
Yeah, but I'm an Everton fan.
No, never mind. But you had Bawley. You had Bawley.
Yeah, we got him that summer, but of course we had Ray Wilson's left back as well. So, and the first game of the 66-67 season was the Charity Shield between Everton and Liverpool. And before the game, Roger Hunt and Ray Wilson ran around the pitch showing the Jules Rimet trophy to the crowd.
Well, that's one of my stories in the book, is that you didn't see the Jules Rimet trophy.
Yeah, I know.
That was a replica.
Because it was locked safely away somewhere.
Because the actual Jules Rimet trophy had been stolen, as you know, 2 months before the World Cup finals. And from then on, every time that you saw what was a major trophy, you were seeing a replica.
Yeah, I mean, given what happened with the theft of the trophy, I guess that's kind of understandable. I mean, one thing I want to ask you as well, Norman, is, given your deep friendship with Jimmy Greaves, do you think he ever fully recovered from not being picked for the final? Deep
down as a sportsman, no. But he had a full life after the World Cup, becoming number one, a premier piss artist who could drink most of us under the table. Managed to. I mean, his biggest victory was conquering the bottle, which he and I had our last drink on February the 20th, 1978, which was Jimmy's 38th birthday. And I held up a cup of black coffee and said to Jim, we'd just finished a book called This One's on Me. Mm-hmm. And I said to Jimmy, Jim, little toast, let's go and get sober out of our minds. And neither of us have had a drink after that. It meant both he and I were boring company, but at least we conquered the bottom. And remember, I was a Fleet Street drinker, which you all know what that means.
Dave, coming on to you, matey. I mean, obviously, we all sort of know about the difficult decision and how it panned out, but I guess reading Norman's book does give you a little insight into the complexities of that situation that perhaps on the surface, reading the newspaper, watching the TV, you wouldn't actually get, would you?
I think the big thing is that Alf Ramsey was the great innovator in picking a team rather than the 11 best players necessarily. Up until that point, everybody was, well, he's the best goalkeeper, he's the best right back, he's the best left back, he's the best centre half, whatever it was, and that was what you automatically picked. But I think Ramsey's genius was he pieced together a tactical system and then the components in that team that worked together, and I think that was. That was his great sort of innovation, and then beyond that, that's how football management became, isn't it? I mean that then became the sort of the bloom. I know Paul will have views on what Gary Lineker did to the Everton team as a great goal.
David, if Alf had anything that was ahead of the field, was that he had a club spirit at international level, and that was very difficult to do. He didn't necessarily pick the best players, but he picked the players who would mould together. And as he once said to me, if he'd been able to pick George Best and Cliffy Jones, we would have not had the wingless wonders. But we didn't have wingers in that class. And so he came up with this incredible plan that he'd tried out at Ipswich and it had worked. And that was playing with withdrawn wingers. And unfortunately, other coaches around the world copied him, and wingers virtually disappeared overnight.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about the Greaves situation for a long time, but obviously there's so much more I want to get into. So I was so fascinated to hear to read about the superstitions of some of the players. I mean, you hear about sort of somebody wants to put the left boot on before the right boot or whatever, but there was so much in there, Norman, that I guess nobody without that intimate connection with players that you had would be vaguely aware of.
Well, it was astonishing. The Leeds United players were the worst. I mean, Jack Charlton, for instance, would always sit on the toilet for 5 minutes, exactly 5 minutes. If he went 10 seconds over, he knew he was going to have a bad game. He also gave up the captaincy of Leeds United because he wanted to be the last man out. So as a skipper, he couldn't lead the team out, so he gave up the captaincy. And he would always kick the ball towards the goal, the last kick just before the referee blew the whistle, and that ball had to go into the net. So Gordon Banks knew better than to try to stop it, and so he would roll the ball into the net, and then he can get on with the game with his conscience clear. The worst of all was Nobby Stiles. Nobby had this terrible habit of he had to rub oil on his chest. And it was always with his right hand and always with 13 rubs of the Vaseline onto his chest. And then he would go and stand on tiptoe, because he was a short guy. He would stand on tiptoe in front of the mirror and put in his lenses, because he was blind as a bat without them, and he always had to be the left lens first, and then the right one. Then he would take out his teeth, and God was in ugly sight, and he would frighten forwards to death the way he looked. But he would take out his teeth, wrap it in a handkerchief, and hand it during the World Cup to Ian Callaghan. As our Everton man there would know all about Ian Callaghan, and he would give Callie his teeth wrapped up in a toilet paper, and then he knew it satisfied all the football gods. He had this terrible. I mean, he always went to church. On the morning of a major match, he would always go to church, and he was a good Roman Catholic boy. And Alan Ball, who was his roommate, said it's no good trying to bribe God, because he was putting loads of money into the collecting plate every time. But Nobby was the king, and Jackie Charlton just close behind him with the superstitions. Yeah. And even Alf Ramsey got caught up in it. He always wore the same lucky blue tracksuit, and underneath he never ever changed his underwear when England. From the first match to the last match, he always wore the same underwear, and it was laundered, of course. but if you get close to any of the players today, they're all full of superstitions. They all cross themselves at least 10 times. It's amazing. I mean, Jimmy Greaves, when he used to run out at Tottenham, he always touched a light switch that was about 10 feet up in the air, and he would jump and touch the light switch. And from then on, because he did that the first game against Blackpool in 65 rather, he scored a hat-trick on that day. And from ever on afterwards, he always touched that light switch. I mean, footballers are notorious for their superstitions.
Ain't they just? Dave, football has changed so much. We're talking 60 years ago, 1966 to 2026. But what doesn't seem to have changed is footballers' adherence to things that they think is going to make a difference before they get on the pitch with regard to superstitions.
No, I mean, Alan Ball was right. You can't bribe God, because presumably the West Germans were trying to bribe God at the same time. So he's got to come down on one side or the other. No, they still are the same. It's incredible. You've got to put your boots on in the right order, or you've got to come out the tunnel in the right order. None of it makes the slightest bit of difference. But I suppose it's all that banishing the doubts, isn't it? All that kind of stuff, that positive mental attitude and all that sort of stuff they talk about these days.
David, when they analyse a defeat, they will try and think back to what they had forgotten to do. So those superstitions have got worse and worse. In defeat, footballers sit and analyse exactly where they went wrong, and it's always something absolutely stupid like Jimmy Greaves not touching the light switch and sad.
Yeah. In the game itself, Norman, you mentioned about how Beckenbauer and Bobby Charlton were sort of cancelling each other out, and then it happened again in 4 years later. But I guess if you can take the opponent's best player out of the game by man marking out of the game, and you get 10 players on 10 rather than 11 on 11, I guess there was some logic in that. But it just seems such a shame that two of the creative players on either side were nullified by that tactic.
If you remember the semi-final, that's when Helmut Schön watched it on the television and he overreacted to the impact that Bobby Charlton had on that match. And he said to Franz Beckenbauer, I want you not to give Bobby Charlton 1 inch of space. Meantime, Alf Ramsey had said to Bobby Charlton, their best player is Franz Beckenbauer, you mustn't give him 1 inch of space. And so they were on top of each other throughout the game. So therefore, if that game had finished at 90 minutes, we would have considered it the most boring World Cup final of all time.
It's a great call, Paul. Coming to you on this, I was going to sort of pick up on that, but Norman's beat me to it there. Would it have been a better game if those two weren't cancelling each other out? But I suppose it was inevitable in some way that was deployed.
It's a really good discussion point, that one, isn't it? And I picked up from Norman's book the fact that the semi-final convinced Helmut's going to make sure that Bobby Charlton was man-marked, and by doing so, he sacrificed his most creative player. So, yeah, it might have been a different game altogether. Who knows? I mean, certainly, one thing that became apparent in the 1970 World Cup was that if you left Beckenbauer unmarked, he was going to absolutely destroy you. So, I think Alf Ramsey was kind of proved right by that decision in 1970. Norm, can I just ask you while you're here, what I love about your book is going back to a moment in time, and you've done a brilliant job in recreating what it was like. And I'm reading it, and I'm seeing the names of the journalists you mentioned, like Desmond Hackett, Reg Jory, Bernard Joy, Laurie Pigeon from the Daily Sketch.
Hugh McIlvenney and the King.
Yeah, I mean, all these names. As a kid reading the newspapers, these were the journals I grew up with. They just resonate with me. So you might not be able to answer this, but out of that kind of esteemed bunch, did you model yourself on any of those journalists in your career? Was the one you preferred over another? Anything like that?
Unfortunately, I wasn't in their class. I mean, the journalists I admired were Geoffrey Green at the Times, who had a wonderful turn of phrase and also knew football inside out and back to front. But the king of all was Hugh McIlvenney, a Scotsman who wrote for The Observer for many years. Had a short spell at the Daily Express and went back to The Observer. And Hughie was the master, and I advise anybody listening to this broadcast to try, if they can, to read Hugh McIlvenney, because he was the king. And there was one other man in his class, and that was Ian Waldridge on the Daily Mail, but Ian wasn't a soccer man. Ian wrote about all sports, whereas Hugh McIlvenney concentrated mainly on football and also boxing.
Fascinating. I mean, you got Jeff Hurst to write the introduction to the book, which is, interesting piece. Just reading what Jeff said about.
Can I say first of all that was fee-free? I mean, Jeff did it out of the goodness of his heart, because he can make a fortune writing about that final in this Jubilee year. But he did it for nothing, which is a sign of our friendship, because I was sports editor of the local paper, the Stratford Express, when Bobby, Jeff and Martin were just starting out. And a fascinating fact is that neither Jeff Hurst or Martin Peters played for England before 1966. So, I mean, they weren't even in the frame to be in the team.
Yeah.
And there they were. They made their names on with Bobby Moore, and West Ham fans always claim that they won the World Cup.
Yeah, I'm coming to that in a moment. I'll mention Jeff Hurst because, without any doubt, Jeff was involved in the most controversial moments of that World Cup final. I guess, we're watching on TV, you see it, again and again. And what did you think when it happened? What did you think about the goal? Was it a goal? Was it not a goal?
Remember, the Wembley press box is 50 yards away.
Yeah.
But we press men were all up on our feet yelling it was a goal when none of us knew. And there's the guy from Azerbaijan was nodding his head saying that the ball definitely crossed the line. I mean, how could he tell? He was 30 yards away and also on an angle. I mean, it was ridiculous to have allowed the goal, to be honest. But as Jeff Hurst always says, look in the scoreboard, look in the scorecard, and you'll find the score, England 4, West Germany 2. So the goal must have counted.
Yeah, it must have been an interesting conversation between a Swiss referee and an Azari linesman who couldn't speak each other's language. And
all he did was nodded, if you remember.
He nodded a few times and waved his arm, but that's about it.
It was Donald Trump cabinet member. All they do is nod their heads.
Dave, coming to you, matey. As I mentioned, that's probably one of the most controversial moments in World Cup history.
It is, and it's the perfect argument for why we shouldn't have VAR. Because what else would we have had to have talked about for 60 years if we'd had, something that made it crystal clear what had happened? That's one of the great joys of football, isn't it? It happens in the moment, you celebrate in the moment, and you can moan about it afterwards, or you can debate it forever. Football it's not a science, it's an art. And, we're trying to mould it into this thing that it isn't in the modern game. And you look back at that the tournament as a whole, but particularly that game. That, as Norman says, the 90 minutes, nothing much of a match, but we're still talking about it all these years later because of that third goal, because of all the stuff that generated, all the stories that it's.
Well, can I say that the Germans have tried the VAR technique, and so have Sky Television, but of course they don't have the online technology from the 60s. And so why the Germans say this proves the ball definitely didn't cross the line, Sky have come up with the ball definitely did cross the line. So what do you do? I mean, as I say, nowadays with VAR, they have cameras up inside the crossbar, and so they know for sure whether the ball crosses the line or not. But back in the 60s, they didn't have that technology.
I think the thing is as well, people were grown up enough then. It was only a game. I know but I mean, I do genuinely think that 20 years on from the war, which was a real matter of life and death, and here we are playing football against the team representing the country that England, Britain, the Allies were fighting against. That shows what a great thing football is. We don't want to get too excited about it, about this sort of nonsense. Was it a goal?
Can I say I was at a press conference just before the final. And Helmut Schön said, is the man from the Daily Express here? And I reluctantly raised a hand. He said, young man, he said, we do not talk war. It is not a war, it is a game. And but I wanted to say to him, but I didn't have the guts. Well, you talked to Alf Ramsey. Alf Ramsey served in the Middle East, and Alf definitely believed it was a war.
Coming to you, Paul. Goal or no goal? I mean, let's have a definitive answer. So settle the argument, Paul, for us. Goal or no goal? This will be the definitive answer. No pressure, buddy.
Gary, it's just absolutely impossible questions to answer. It's like asking me, is the life after death? And I really could not come down one way or the other as to whether it was a goal or not. And I just totally concur with Dave's opinion before that. If VAR had been in place in '66, we wouldn't be talking about this now. And isn't it great that even another 60 years on from this conversation, other people will still be talking about whether this was a goal or not? And it was Danny Blanchard famously said, "Wasn't football's about glory." And this is all kind of linked to that. We're still having this debate now. If you ask me, did I think it was a goal at the time? Look, I was a 10-year-old kid watching on TV. I thought it was a goal. But what my angle was like, I really have no idea. So I switched the argument around and say, you asked me, did I think it was a goal? If you asked me, did I think it wasn't a goal? Then I would say, no, I think it was a goal.
Can I make the point that Roger Hunt was the man closest to the incident, and he immediately turned with his hand up? And we always say that Roger was one of the most honest men walking this earth, and if he said it was a goal, it was a goal.
Yeah, that's a good point. No, actually, I remember that when it was there, he didn't try and put the rebound in.
No, exactly. He turned with his hand up.
He was convinced, wasn't he? Yeah. Just deviate slightly. I just want to ask your opinion about VAR. I mean, you've been watching football for a long, long time. Your grimace there suggests I think I probably know the answer, mate. But what are your thoughts on VAR?
Well, I fought for many, many years to say the only thing that matters is getting it right. And so I was an advocate for using television cameras to decide whether the decision was right or wrong. But to be honest, it's got out of hand and it's ruining the game. But I'll tell you what, it will stay in the game because it's provided jobs for the boys. The old referees now, when they retire in their mid-40s, they don't hang their whistles up. They then go into the VAR studio and they continue to earn. And this is two men for every match. And they won't let that one go, the referees.
It's interesting.
VAR is here to stay.
Yeah, a couple of things I've just mentioned there. I watched the Europa League final, and when they had the officials coming on to pick the medals up, there was the ref, the two linesmen, and the fourth official, and then there was about 4 or 5 other people, whether they were VAR or whatever. But a while ago, we did a podcast. We were fortunate enough to get Abraham Klein on the podcast with us. And I asked him about VAR, and he said, "I don't mind VAR." He says, "But if it's clear and obvious, if a referee looks at that for 5 seconds and he can't tell that it's right or wrong, then he should let it go. It's not clear and obvious. You can't see it in the first 5 seconds. It's not clear and obvious." But interesting point. Just want to come back. You mentioned briefly about when you sort of worked locally with the West Ham guys. It must have been amazing to these guys that you'd sort of been in touch with for quite a while to suddenly become massive national heroes.
Jeff Hirsch always says that the biggest difference he found was when he phoned up, he didn't have to say, "I'm a friend of Bobby Moore's" anymore. When he's booking a table, he would ring up and say, "Can I have a dining table? Jeff Hirsch here." "Yes, sir." But I mean, that is, as I say, the amazing statistic is that neither Martin Peters or Jeff Hirsch had ever played for England at the start of that year. And I mean, it's incredible. But it changed both their lives. I mean, and Martin felt that he was always coming third. You always said Moore, Hurst, Peters. And this used to rankle with not so much Martin, but with his wife Kathy. She always said, why are you always the third man? And it got to the stage where Martin badgered Ronnie Greenwood so much that Ronnie had to let him go, and he went to Tottenham Hotspur. And in part exchange for Martin's boyhood hero, Jimmy Greaves. Martin had once been a touchline spectator when Jimmy was playing for his school in Dagenham against Martin's school, also in Dagenham. And Jimmy scored 10 of the 13 goals, beating Martin's team. And after that, Martin had been standing on the touchline watching it. And evermore, he was a Jimmy Greaves fan. This is when Jimmy Greaves was 14 years old.
Coming to you, Paul, that's one of the things that struck me in the book, and Norm referred to this a couple of times already, is that neither Hurst or Peters have played for England before that year. I mean, when we were talking in July, so, with 7 months, that's how long their career was, but not even that long. I can't imagine a scenario now where a player hasn't played for England before 2026 two players go and score all the goals in a World Cup final. The magnitude of that event, which, I mean, I didn't realise until I read Norman's book, is amazing.
I hadn't realised that either, Gary. So I mean, as we said before we started recording, the great thing about this book is I think I know a lot about 66 World Cup, but there was stuff in there that I didn't know. That this is fascinating insight, and the pieces Jeff Hurst and Dev put together. I remember that when England were doing their warm-ups, they played a game at Goodison Park in January against Poland. I think England won 1-0 as at the game. And look at some of the players who were in that team. I think Gordon Harris from Burnley was in that team, but didn't make the actual cut-off for the first.
He was in the 40, yeah.
Yeah, it was in the 40s, was it? Did it go down to 27 after that, did it not?
It came down to 27 and then 22.
Yeah.
And Alf stuck not with the players that we would have picked, he stuck with the team that he wanted. And as I said, he wanted the club spirit. And that's why the great individualists like the Rodney Marshes and the Frank Worthingtons, Alf had no time for them.
And do you think a lot of that it was linked to his time as being Ipswich manager when he'd overachieved with the team rather than with outside players?
I would say it stuck with him from his playing days. I mean, he was always a solid rather than spectacular player. He played 32 times, I think, for England, and he was never anybody. He never ever made a headline. Alf, you know, he was a team player, and when he was a manager, he wanted team players, and that's why he preferred sweat over skill, I'm afraid. But how can you argue with his success?
Come to you, Dave. I mean, it's a couple of things. One fairly flippant question, then a more serious one. So I'll get the flippant question to you first. Which two footballers haven't played for England yet and now going to appear in the World Cup and score goals in the World Cup final? That's the first question. You think about that for a second. And the second part is what's just Norman was referring to, which comes out so many times in the book, is the team spirit that Ramsey created about that was so important. The squad was so important, and how much of a contribution was that compared to the ability of the players, do you think?
Well, the first question, it's not going to happen. And the second question, it was the triumph of the team, wasn't it? It wasn't the individual. It wasn't, the great somebody who had a fantastic World Cup and scored 9 goals or 10 goals, or was a great midfield. It was that all of those parts fitted into the jigsaw, didn't they? Everything. It was like a well-oiled machine. He had Jack Charlton because he didn't trust Bobby Moore. He had ultimately he had Jeff Hurst, who worked perfectly with Roger Hunt. You'd got Alan Ball in there running all over the place. You've got 2 great fullbacks who did a lot of the attacking, so you didn't really need the wingers in that sense. He had the right players and he had the intelligence to use them in the right way, which we've seen plenty of England teams that have had lots of talented footballers over the last 30 odd years or whatever. And when it comes to a World Cup, they don't fit together as a team, do they? There's that Golden Generation documentary that's just come out, and there were some great players in that team. Not as great as '66, I would say, but they didn't fit together as a team, did they? They were in the finish. They were a bunch of individuals on the pitch trying to do something for themselves as much as for the team. Everybody in that team in 1966 put the team first, and Alf Ramsey made sure that they did, because otherwise, if they didn't, they weren't playing, were they?
An interesting fact to come out of the book is that Alf and Bobby Moore were never, ever close. And if Alf could have done, he would have selected the team without Bobby Moore, because Bobby and his mate, sidekick Jimmy Greaves, always as Cockney boys, always take the mickey out of Alf. And his, unfortunately, Alf always denied it, but he had a gypsy background. This is fact. And once they were sitting in the coach, and a farmer carrying hay went by on a horse-driven trailer with a pile of hay, and Alf and Bobby Moore said, "Oh, look, they're going to make Alf's bed up," and Alf pretended he hadn't heard, but he went puce, and he vowed that he would get his own back on Bobby, but he never ever did.
Just one thing about the World Cup. I mean, we watched the World Cup, and I know there's a particular instance I know rankles with Paul particularly, when the game that England was supposed to play at Goodison Park was shifted to Wembley. And there was also sort of a lot of South American angst about how European referees were favouring European teams. I mean, it's impossible to say how fair things were, but was that something that you were aware of at the time, Norman?
Yes, very much so. Because being a reporter at the Daily Express, I had lots of friends from South America, and they always, every time they had any opportunity, would say that was a bent World Cup, and they would. I mean, they tried to burn down the embassy, in Buenos Aires, because Alf at the end of the quarterfinal with Argentina, who were by far the most talented team in the tournament, but they didn't have the temperament to go with their talent. Alf called them animals, and that was the headline in all the South American papers. And 4 years later in Mexico, the chant from the Mexican fans was always aimed at Alf. for calling them animals. They hated Alf. They always were insistent that England cheated to get that World Cup. They played every home match at Wembley. That's never happened before or since. That the champion team plays every game at the same stadium.
Yeah, I guess, coming to you, Dave, I guess it's always a case that home teams or the host country always has an advantage in a World Cup. But I guess, playing at Wembley every game, even though they weren't meant to originally, wasn't part of the original plan, and having sort of favourable referee, how much difference do you think that made? I mean, I know it's difficult to say, but I mean, is this the emotional pull? I mean, I remember reading this part in Norman's book, and it sort of gives an idea about the importance of Wembley and how England sort of felt at home there.
I think Argentina complaining about anything is pretty rich given what happened in 1978, but we'll move on from that.
Yeah.
I mean, from Paul's perspective, obviously, it was hugely frustrating that England didn't play at Goodison. They went and played at Wembley, and if that was how the tournament was set up before, and that's how it should have been. England should have gone on and play. And I do think in this country, it was a really refreshing period when they were rebuilding Wembley, and the England team went out and played around the country, because it's the England team. It's not the London team per se. It's the England team. So I think that was a. I'll
tell you what. You had the game of the tournament at Goodison Park when North Korea were winning 3-0. Yeah. And then Eusebio took over, and then he scored four goals. Remember that? Do you remember that?
I was there, Norman. I was a 10-year-old lad on the Glover Street terraces, and I mean, we just got in the stadium, and North Korea scored after about 3 minutes, and people were coming in and saying, "What's the score, lad? What's the score? It's 1-0 to Korea." Nah, I guess not. What's the score? What's the score, mate? No, they're winning 1-0.
You called them the Diddy people, didn't you?
Yeah, well, they were so thin and so small, Norman, as I'm sure you remember. They were so slight in their build.
Yeah.
And when they went 3-0 up and the crowds all chanting, "We want 4, we want," we really thought we're seeing history in the making here. And then suddenly Eusebio got going. He started knocking their players off the ball, and they just couldn't deal with Eusebio, who probably delivered the best single performance I've ever seen by a player in a game to bring a team back from the dead. So yeah, it's still one of the best games of football I've ever seen in my life.
Eusebio was probably the best player ever to come out of Africa. He was born in Mozambique, which was owned in those days by Portugal, and he played for Benfica. And what a gentleman! He never ever cheated. He was unlucky enough to come up against Nobby Stiles in the 1966 World Cup final, and then in the 1968 European Cup final. And each time, Nobby marked him out of it. And I had to say, Nobby did it without fouling. He just did it by discipline and determination. And he didn't give Eusebio an inch in 2 matches.
I remember Eusebio being a gentleman. I remember 1967 European Cup, 68 European Cup final. He was through with all his deputy to beat, or a chance to be able to deputy to beat.
1968,
yeah. And he stepped saved it. And Eusebio one time he shook his hand.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, how is that for a gentleman? In a European Cup final, achy thump. I'm just going to come to perhaps one of the most impressive parts of the book is at the end of the World Cup. Now, I mean, we watched on TV, and it was something I'll never forget, watching England win the World Cup. Norman, you were there, and you actually got in the dressing room afterwards. And the best part of the book, I can't recommend the book enough, but this part particularly is really fascinating about the inner workings of what happened there. So just give us a little bit of your feelings about your memories about that, Norman.
Well, I have to tell you that I tied myself to a gentleman called Len Went, who was the PR for Wembley. And I'd previously been on a trade boxing paper called Boxing News. And so I'd got to know Len really well. And I was just determined to get Len to get me past the Jobsworths. There were all these stewards around, stopping people from going to areas where they shouldn't go. And I went round the back way where Len went. He taught me past all the Jobsworths. I actually saw the Queen and bowed to her. I actually did. She was dressed in canary yellow, and she was just about to get into her Rolls Royce, and she gave me a flashing smile, but I have to admit it was probably the people behind me, but I accepted it for myself. And then as I got to the dressing room, Bobby Moore was leading the players off the pitch because Alf was giving them the hurry up because they had to go to the banquet in the evening. Bobby came past, he carrying the cup. I kissed the cup and then cuddled Bobby more, or might have been the other way round. But then I was just about to shake hands with Georgie Cohen, who's an old buddy of mine, and Alf gave me one of his baleful stares, as much as say, get out. And so one of the Jobsworths were in there, and they decided to bundle everybody out who was not connected with the team. And unfortunately, I had to accept that I had to go, but he also bundled out the gentleman shooting a film for Goal. I don't know if you ever saw it.
Yeah,
Goal, which was a wonderful thing. It was scripted by Brian Glanville, who's a great journalist. It was narrated by Nigel Patrick, one of our great English actors, and Johnny Hawksworth, a great jazz bass player. It sounds well worth watching if you can. It's really artistic. It's wonderful. When Rattin gets sent off in the quarter-final, there's Johnny Hawksworth just plays the double bass, and you see Rattin walking off. And he's a very stately man, Tony Rattin. I got to know him. He's a lovely man, and. But he was trying to referee the match, and that's why he got sent off. It wasn't for kicking anybody. He tried to referee the game. It was fascinating to watch. And Ken Aston, who was the chief of the referees, he was 6'3" primary school headmaster from Ilford in Essex, an old buddy of mine. Ken, on the way back from that match, he was in his little Morgan sports car he used to have, and he was driving along, and he stopped at traffic lights, and he suddenly went into his head, hold on, I've pulled up, I've stopped at the yellow, now the red, I'm definitely stopped. And that's when he came up with the idea for the cards, which were used in the 1970 World Cup. They used the yellow card for the first time, and then the red card to send somebody off. And it was all because he stopped at these traffic lights on the way back from Wembley that day.
Yeah, serendipity. I mean, okay, Paul. Another impossible question for you. I mean, you watched the final, remember seeing over the World Cup. The difference between that and actually being there and actually getting in the dressing room. I mean, what a stunning experience.
Well, it's now only 60 years later that I really appreciate what it meant for me personally, and also it changed Geoff Hurst's life. And Geoff and I are the only two remaining. All my pals, like Desmond Hackett and all the great journalists, Geoffrey Green, all the Hugh McIlvenney, they've all gone to the great press box in the sky. And I'm so fortunate to have been there, and I've tried to be as honest as I can, getting all the facts down on paper, because I think it's for prosperity, not for my prosperity, but for posterity. I think it deserves to be told, the story.
Definitely. And Norman, what's really good about your book is the background on the players who didn't play in the World Cup. So the world like Ron Springer, Ron Flowers, all these people who...
people forget Catty Benetti was...
I'd forgotten he was the third choice goalkeeper.
Ronnie Springer.
Right, yeah. Ron Springer, excellent, who was the regular goalkeeper until Banks took his place. And all these background... I mean, I love the bit where you talk... when there was this injury scare and Ron Flowers was on standby. I mean, what must have been going through his head?
It wasn't an injury scare, it was sore throats. But both I think it was certainly Bobby Moore had a sore throat, and they were worried. And Ron Flowers was on standby. And he wasn't told until the day before right, we won't be needing you, Ron. So Ron was on tenterhooks, thinking he might have to play in the World Cup final.
I mean, Norman, you often used to write in Backpass about the reunions that the squad of 22 would have on a regular basis to play golf and things like that. And Ron Flowers was one of the key organisers. So were you ever at those events? What were they like?
Oh, they were wonderful for reminiscing. But the sad fact is that there's only Geoff Hurst left, so and Geoff's not a golfer. but Geoff, incidentally, I must say this: he's a wonderful man, and what an advert for our game. He's always immaculately dressed, always says the right things. I want to give a shout out for Geoff Hurst, because he represents our game with dignity. I just wish we had a lot of other players who could look up to Jeff and know just how to behave as a celebrity.
Yeah. Dave, just coming to you there. I mean, that's one of the things that perhaps isn't sort of headlined in the book, but certainly gives it another depth of understanding, a greater depth of understanding of these players, isn't it? That, you know, the explanation that Norman gives about each of them and how they sort of fitted into the jigsaw. Even the guys that didn't play, it was still an important part of the squad and of the players that triumphed.
Ultimately, they got medals about, 40 odd years later on before they finally got a medal for the rest of the squad. But, you know, straight away when the players were given it was a £22,000 bonus, wasn't it? And they were going to do it pro rata. And Bobby Moore said, no, everybody gets £1,000 and that's it. We were all in it.
And then the taxman tried to take his bite. And Bobby represented the players. He paid the lawyers' fees for them to go to court, and they managed to win. They got £1,000 each. The Germans all got £2,000 each, you know, and they were losers.
It's fascinating. I mean, there again, we talked about things that are the same in football over 60 years. That is crazy compared to the modern day. Well, no, that was up there. It was in those days, and the difference now, we talk about £1,000 each player, thanks to, you know, the guys saying nobody gets a share. And they also, I think they got a £60 match fee as well on top of that. £60 and £1,000. So £1,060 for winning the World Cup. Gentlemen, you were robbed. You were robbed. And as you say, Norman, it's fascinating as well. I didn't know this, that the taxman actually wanted to take a portion of it, but basically Bobby took him to court, I understand.
Yeah, he made Bobby Moore paid for a solicitor to represent them in a High Court hearing. And they actually had a hearing in just the bottom end of Fleet Street in the Strand there, in the law courts. And Bobby had to go and represent the England team to fight for their £1,000.
It's crazy. I mean, taxmen are very, very popular, the best of times, but, you know, I mean, talk about making yourself unpopular, Ecky Thump. I just want to move on to things after the game now and what happened after the game. And another part of this that, I mean, I didn't realise, didn't know in depth was how the boring banquet afterwards that the players had to attend, and then how the different players with their different personalities celebrated afterwards.
Well, I mean, now don't forget you have the wags, the wives and girlfriends, the wags. Yeah. Well, that nickname hadn't been even thought of. The girls, they all went up to a sort of wimpy bar type thing at the top of the hotel, the Royal Garden in Kensington. And the players who were at the banquet downstairs listened to boring speeches. And Pickles, the dog, who had found the stolen World Cup, Pickles was a guest of honour at the banquet, and the wives were left upstairs in the wimpy bar. And God, did they give the earache to their husbands? It was ridiculous. It was another planet, a different world completely.
There was something I found fascinating. You sort of described how the different players and different personalities, how they celebrate. Like Martin Peters, I think you said, didn't never leave his hotel room.
Well, I started the day walking around the garden at 8 o'clock in the morning with Bobby Moore, who was on one of his lone walks. Bob was a great walker because he could never sleep, and so he would walk at night and things. So anyway, we met in the garden at 8 o'clock in the morning, and at 2 o'clock the following morning, 2 o'clock, there was a Bobby Moore, pissed as a pudding, in the Playboy Club, singing Magic Moments at the piano. Magic Moments. And sitting at the piano accompanying him was Burt Bacharach, the guy who wrote the song. It's incredible. So to my memory of it, meeting Bobby at 8 o'clock in the morning, when we discussed boxing, we didn't talk about football, because Bobby, like myself, we were both boxing fans, so we talked about Muhammad Ali, who Muhammad Ali was sitting at the back of the press box during the game, fast asleep. He was on American time, and he went fast asleep. He was so bored by the game, it meant nothing to him. But he was Cassius Clay then, of course. It's amazing the memories that come back with me, and how lucky I was and how privileged I was to be there as the quotes man for the Daily Express. At the time, it didn't mean very much, to be honest.
No.
But now, 60 years later, I can look back on it as a highlight of my life. 4 years later, I was in Mexico with them. They went and lost the game against Germany in Leon.
Yes.
A nightmare.
Yeah.
And they were leading 2-0. Oh,
Yeah.
Alf.
Yeah, I remember
Alf didn't know how to use substitutes because he'd never
Charlton
experienced it. He didn't know what substitutes were.
Dave, coming to you, I mean, one of the things that's there again, you find out about in the book is how the players reacted after the final, after the victory. I don't know what it meant to them, but how they sort of decided to celebrate in so many different ways. And without somebody like Norman telling the stories in this book, you'd have no idea, would you?
I love the idea of Jack Charlton finding himself in somebody's house that he didn't know who it was, waking up at 7 o'clock the following morning. And I mean,
incredible.
It's yeah. I'm not sure that Harry Kane will be.
Can I tell that story? He's with Jimmy Mossop from the Sunday Express, a lovely man who died very recently. Jimmy Mossop, but Jack Charlton came out of the banquet, and his wife was in 2 days short of delivering their third child, and Jack said, "Look," to Jimmy Mossop, who was an old pal of his. He said, "Jim, you're my date for the evening." And Jim said, "What?" He said, "Yep, we're going out on the razzle." He said, "Look, I've got all this boot money." He had £200 in readies that he showed that it had been paid by, I think it was Adidas, for wearing their boots. And he said, we'll go and get drunk out of our heads. And he said, you're my date for the evening. And he and Jimmy went off, and they spent 3 hours in a gentleman's club, didn't have to buy a single drink between them. And then at 8 o'clock the next morning, they've woken up in Walthamstow, which is in Far East London. They didn't know how they'd got there, what a night they'd had. And Jack's gone out to clear his head and gone into the garden. And a lady shouted over the fence, "Are you Jackie Charlton?" He said, "Yes." He said, "I know your mum." He said, we're from the same area. I used to live next door to your mum." And Jackie thought he was dreaming it. And Jim, he said to Jimmy Mossop, "Jimmy, pinch me. Let me. Did we really win the World Cup yesterday?" And
classic. I mean, so different, Dave, to today. So I can't imagine any player of any sort of professional club doing that sort of down with the people, as it were.
Yeah, and there's another story from before the game. Bobby Charlton nipping out in the morning. Bobby Charlton, the most famous sportsman in Britain.
Probably. Oh well, he and Ray Wilson. He and Ray Wilson went for a walk. Ray, this is on the morning of the match. Ray Wilson has bought a pair of shoes to wear at the banquet that evening. And they've gone into a shoe shop, and nobody knew who they were. There's no pressmen around. Nobby Stiles found a church in Golders Green, which we all know is a big Jewish area. And Georgie Cohen, who's part Jewish, he said, "My life." He said, "You're the only person I know who could find a church, a Catholic church in bloody Golders Green."
It's so weird, Dave, isn't it, just to hear these stories. I mean, and we wouldn't know otherwise without somebody like Norman being able to recall these and have the great talent to tell the story so well.
I feel a bit sorry for the current players, in that sense. I mean, obviously they've got all this material wealth and, fame and fortune and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, these guys had huge success and remained rooted in sort of normality. You can't see Harry Kane and Jude Bellingham being able to nip out to the shoe shop before a game at Wembley, can you? It's very unlikely. Not that they need.
You couldn't make it up.
You couldn't, no. Okay. I mean, obviously you had a really good relationship with players, but Alf not so much, I suspect.
I was on quotes duty for the Daily Express, and that was considered the worst job ever because it was like trying to get secrets out of the Kremlin. I mean, number one, Alf didn't want to give any secrets away to anybody, and he used to consider every word he dropped was like a precious jewel, and he would never survived in today's world in which they have to give conferences and they have to face the media, they have to face the television camera, they have to face the people like yourselves with your podcasts. I mean, it's a whole new ball game now. And another thing to remember is that I was chasing quotes at a time when the World Cup had been stolen. Argentina had tried to kick the England door down after their defeat in the quarter-final, and the Queen was in the house. So, I mean, you can imagine how difficult it was to get anybody to talk to you because of all the fear that was around. I mean, it was astonishing.
Absolutely. I guess one of the things that comes clear in the book is there's a far better relationship between the press and the players and the press and the England camp than there is now. There seems to be much more of a, I won't say matey, but not far away from that.
No, I think the word you're looking for is respect. There's respect between the players and the press. I mean, that's gone out the window long ago.
Oh, yeah.
We have nowadays we have foreign players playing for foreign coaches and clubs mostly owned by foreign syndicates. It's a whole new planet. It's a completely different game now, and it's definitely not for the better. I think football was much better in my youth than it is now.
Paul, coming to you, I mean, as Norman referred to, there's obviously there's a world of difference now between how it was and 60 years ago, with the sort of the 24-hour news cycle and social media. And do you think that's created a bridge? That's created a barrier. So players are far more defensive. And respect that the word Norman used, perhaps that respect has sort of been deteriorated by the way the modern game operates.
I think social media's played a big part in that as well. I'm just kind of thinking back to Norman's stories of how the players celebrated within the World Cup. Can you imagine now that'll be all over social media, pictures of like Jack Charlton found in someone's garden, didn't know what he was doing. There's Bobby Moore, the Playboy Club. What's he doing at the Playboy Club? I mean, you just couldn't get away with that type of post-match celebration now, could you? It just, I think Bobby Moore went to see Danny LaRue and stuff. No,
it's Jeff Hurst.
Yeah, Jeff Hurst led them, went to see Danny LaRue. So,
Martin Peters went to bed with his wife.
Yeah, fantastic. So, all that would just be blown out of proportion now, wouldn't it? Whereas, when you think about it, they'd won the Sixers World Cup final. For that time, they are mega football stars. Yet they could still go out in central London and not be harassed by people wanting selfies, wanting to do videos with them. They could just go out and have a bloody good night, and they deserved it.
Dave, what do you think about? I mean, obviously, in your sort of your daytime job, as it were, you have this sort of role involved with the clubs and players. I mean, do you think it would be easier in Norman's day than it was now?
I think for the players, it's much easier than it is now. I mean, you got to remember. I mean, Match of the Day only started a couple of years before the World Cup, so footballers weren't television stars, which they are now. I mean, they're footballers, but they get paid the money they get paid to be on television. That's the reality of it. They're media stars more than just sports people now.
They didn't know how to give interviews, did they? I mean, this when they used to say over the moon, Brian. It was a cliche. I'm sick as a parrot. I mean, that's the way footballers spoke in those days. But now they're trained to give interviews.
They're trying to give interviews, and therefore they're not as interesting as they used to be. Either when they did occasionally give an interview, that's another story. But I mean, the growth of the mobile phone, having a camera on your phone, that's changed absolutely everything for anybody. I think in the public eye, and particularly, famous footballers. Every time you go out, somebody wants to take your photograph. Whatever you do, somebody on the other side of the pub snapping away at you.
I mean, just this week, I saw some terrible photographs that were virtually stolen of Jack Grealish, drunk as a lord, trying to sleep off his booze, and somebody had taken snaps of him asleep on a deck chair, and it was awful to see. Why can't they give them privacy? It's disgraceful.
Yes, it is. Okay, I know we've been chatting for a long time. I'm really grateful for your time, Norman. Really enjoying it. I just want to touch on a couple of things about Alf before we sort of close. Firstly, quick question. Could a manager like Alf Ramsey, an England manager like Alf Ramsey, survive in the modern world?
No. No, Alf and my particular favourite, Bill Nicholson, would really struggle with the modern world. They wouldn't know how to cope with you're on show 24 hours a day. It's all the social media. You don't get any privacy at all. I mean, I don't know how the likes of the City manager, the Arsenal manager, I don't know how they cope. It's astonishing, the pressure on them.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
and Alf and Bill Nicholson were men of few words, but God, when it came to action, they were the kings.
I want to touch on this there again. I found this part of your book fascinating. Firstly, about the way Alf Ramsey got sacked. And I know you almost had a scoop on this, which you were robbed of. And then Alf's sad end as well, which seems such a terrible way for a man to sort of, thrown away, as it were.
Again, I don't want to give too much away from
No,
what's
no,
in
no,
the book.
of course not.
Otherwise, there would be nothing
Of
surprising.
course not. Absolutely.
But I was working for the Sunday. I was a freelance for the Sunday Mirror at the time, and so we Peter Lorenzo, my partner then, he and I hid Alf Ramsey away. He was living at Thames Valley Road in Ipswich, a very modest house. And we put the story out on the smokescreen that he'd gone off to Spain to think over his future. But he'd actually sat there and given me an interview all about his life. And although he didn't want any mention of the fact that he came from Romany stock, and he was, for some reason, he was ashamed of that when he should have been very proud of it.
I recommend anybody to read, but get the book for God's sake, people. If you're interested in football, it's a must. But the story that Norman tells about how Alf got sacked and his reporting of it, I mean, is absolutely really, really fascinating. Just a couple of final thoughts. It wasn't until after, as the following November, I think, when they were playing a friendly, I think it was Czechoslovakia, but they actually took the official team photo with the World
team
Cup.
photograph. Nobody thought of getting the players sat properly and in their pristine shirts for a team photograph. And it wasn't until 3 months later that they were all together on the eve of the match against Czechoslovakia, and that's when the photograph was taken. And that photograph was hanging on many, many walls, telling the lie that this was taken in the week of the final, but it was taken 3 months afterwards.
Yeah, amazing. Dave, any final thoughts before we sort of close?
Obviously, it's a great book about the World Cup, but I think what it really is it's a really fascinating time capsule of a footballing world that's long gone. And yeah, I think it's really important to get all those stories down and those little nuances and the way things have changed. I mean,
yeah, 100% right, David. I mean, it's a different world, a different planet.
Younger people who read it won't comprehend quite how different it was, So I think it's crucial to get this stuff down so that, as Paul said earlier on, we'll still be talking about this game in 60 years' time. Not us four, sadly, but people will still be talking about this game in 60 years' time. And they need to know all the bits around it, as well as Jeff Hurst's goals and Bobby Moore wiping his hands and all that sort of stuff. They need to know the stuff about Bobby Charlton being able to have a walk down the road on the morning of the cup final and Jack Charlton waking up in somebody's house. This stuff is fascinating. It's a lost world, but it's what brings the book to life, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Final thoughts?
Yeah, I echo completely though what Dave said. It's a fantastic book, and I said at the start, I found out things from reading this book that I didn't know about the Sixers World Cup final. And what's brilliant about it is, looking at the age range of people here, we're the last generation to see England win a World Cup. And once we go, there's nobody who can tell these stories. And what's brilliant is Norman was actually there at Wembley in the dressing room with the England team, and he's still around to tell those stories. And we have to savor these stories. We have to publish these stories. We have to really enjoy them, because in 10, 15 years' time, there'll be a Talking Heads documentary on Channel 5 or something about the World Cup, and none of the people talk about were actually there when it happened. So it's a fantastic book, and I'm just honoured to be on the same podcast as Norman Giller. It's been an absolute privilege for me.
I agree more, guys. I mean, if you're interested in football and you remember the World Cup and you sort of lived it, then there's so much that you didn't know about, so much that you can learn. And if you weren't alive then, even more to learn. Norman, massive thank you for coming on the podcast. It's been a real honour and privilege to speak to you.
Can I have a last word? Can I just say that
please?
The book is available at www.normangiller.co.uk. normangiller.co.uk.
I was going to ask you that question to the last one, but yeah, thank you. And guys, buy the book; it's absolutely brilliant. Go to Norman's, because all the money will go to Norman then, rather than Jeff Bezos taking a cut out of it. Jeff Bezos has got plenty of bloody money. Anyway, it's just to round out to Mangold, the famous phrase, there's nobody on the pitch, but we think it's all over. And it is now.